It was one of those stormy nights where you can feel the walls tremble with every thunderclap. The rain hammered against the windows, and the wind howled like a whale coming from some dark, distant world. I was alone at home, and all I wanted was for the power not to go out. Unfortunately, that was too much to ask. All it took was one bolt of lightning to cross the sky, and in seconds, a blackout plunged the entire city into complete darkness. The only thing I had to light up the house was a small flashlight and a few candles I found tossed in the back of a kitchen drawer. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the storm. The darkness seemed to have a weight of its own, as if it were sucking all the air around me. I turned on the flashlight and began to walk through the house, checking doors and windows, making sure they were locked. Every sound, every creak, felt amplified, and an unsettling feeling began to grow inside me, as if something invisible were watching my every move. After assuring myself that everything was locked, I decided to go down the hallway to check if the back door was closed as well. The hallway was long and narrow, and the dim flashlight barely reached the end, which was swallowed by a dense darkness. I took a deep breath and began to walk slowly. When I was halfway there, a strange sensation took over me, a kind of intense cold that seemed to emanate from the end of the hallway. That's when I heard it, a soft sound, as if someone were dragging their feet. My heart began to beat faster, but I kept going, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The flashlight started to flicker, casting distorted shadows on the walls around me. Then, in one of those flickers, I saw it. At the end of the hallway, a tall figure, motionless, with its face obscured by shadow. It was just standing there, without making a sound, as if it were watching me. My whole body froze. I knew I was alone in the house, but there, before me, was someone or something. My mind tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a shadow cast by the flashlight. Maybe I was seeing things because of the panic brought on by the darkness. But then, it moved, a slight tilt of the head, as if it were curious, or worse, as if it were taunting me. The flashlight flickered, threatening to leave me in complete darkness, and every time the light wavered, it seemed to move a little closer. The distance between us decreased almost imperceptibly, but with an eerily precise rhythm, as if it were waiting for the right moment to fully reveal itself. I could hear my heavy breathing, the sound of my racing heartbeat, and in that moment, I wanted to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. Finally, with one last burst of courage, I lifted the flashlight, trying to get a better look at the figure. The moment I did, the light revealed a pale, expressionless face, like a grotesque mask. The eyes, two dark hollows, locked onto mine, and I felt as if I were being pulled into that void. It seemed to absorb all the light, all the hope. The cold I had felt before was now unbearable, like a blizzard was trapped at the end of that hallway. When the flashlight finally died, despair washed over me. I was in total darkness, certain that it was drawing closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the slow, shuffling footsteps echoing on the floor, getting closer. A dark, rhythmic sound that seemed to dictate the time I had left until it reached me. My fingers fumbled through my pocket in desperation until I found a match. Trembling, I lit it, and the small flame illuminated my hand, creating a tiny safe zone in the darkness. But it was there. Just a few feet away, the figure remained still, unmoving, as if it knew I couldn't escape. Its head tilted again, and even with the faint light from the match, I could see its empty eyes focusing directly on mine, transmitting a coldness and emptiness I had never felt before. That's when the flame went out. In the complete blackness, the only thing that remained was the sound of its heavy breathing, a breath that seemed to blend with mine. I tried to run, but in the dark, every step was a struggle against the panic consuming me. Behind me, its footsteps continued, slow and calculated, as if it were chasing me just to prolong the terror. Finally, I reached the door to the living room and, with a final effort, managed to light another candle I had left there. The candlelight illuminated the space around me, but it was gone. Only silence remained. My heart was still racing, and I forced myself to believe it had all been a hallucination, an effect of fear and darkness. However, when I looked back at the hallway, I saw a mark on the floor, as if something had dragged a foot along there. That imprint was still fresh, and the feeling that something inhuman had visited me didn't disappear. Since that night, every blackout, I feel that presence. A shadow that seems to wait for the next opportunity to appear at the end of the hallway, where I least expect it, just to remind me that darkness can hide things far beyond human comprehension. I never thought I would get stuck in an elevator, let alone during a blackout. It was a stifling summer night, and the heat seemed to intensify with each passing minute, making the air inside that small metal box almost unbearable. I was heading home after a long, stressful day, and when I stepped into the elevator, the last thing on my mind was that something as simple as a power failure could turn into one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The elevator had barely started to ascend when I felt a jolt. The lights flickered, and in an instant, everything plunged into complete darkness. I felt the elevator come to a sudden stop, leaving me trapped between floors, with no sign of when the system would be restored. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I reached for my phone in my pocket, but with no signal and only 5% battery left, I decided to use it sparingly. I turned on the flashlight and examined the metal walls around me, feeling as if the space was getting smaller, as if the elevator itself were swallowing me whole. The lack of sound, the darkness, and the heat made everything feel more intense. The silence was absolute, until, suddenly, it was broken by a faint whisper. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, a result of nervousness and claustrophobia. But the whisper repeated, coming from some dark corner of the elevator. The voice was soft, almost affectionate, but there was something sinister in its tone. Called my name. My heart started to race. I was absolutely alone in there. No one else had entered the elevator with me. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was someone on the staircase, close enough for the sound to penetrate through the doors. But the sound was there inside the elevator, and it was clear. The voice whispered my name again, this time with a tone that seemed almost mocking, as if it were enjoying my fear. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely a thread, almost a whisper. The silence returned, and for a few seconds, I convinced myself that it was just a delusion. But then, the voice returned, this time whispering things only I could know. Secrets no one else was aware of, memories I hadn't shared with anyone. I felt the air inside the elevator grow heavier, as if something invisible were sharing the space with me, a presence that crept closer with each whispered word. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to push the sound out of my mind, but the voice was relentless. "You're not alone," it said, and this time the tone was cold, cutting. I was trembling, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to get out, but there was nowhere to go. The elevator seemed to shrink around me, and the heat became unbearable, as if that presence were sucking the air and energy from the room. My hands shook as I tried to call the doorman, anything to distract myself from the growing terror. Finally, someone picked up, but the line was unstable, filled with static, as if something were interfering with the call. I managed to say only, "I'm trapped," before the line cut out, leaving me alone again, surrounded by a deadly silence. That was when the voice laughed. It was a soft, muffled laugh, but it reverberated against the metal walls of the elevator. The sound seemed to come from all sides, wrapping around me, and there was something in it that made me feel exposed, vulnerable. I could feel the weight of that presence drawing closer. It felt as if something were leaning over me, analyzing me, trying to enter my mind. Then, the voice whispered, "Remember that time?" And it began to describe a memory from my childhood, a moment I had deeply buried. The memory was painful, and hearing the voice relive that event sent a chill down my spine. It was impossible that anyone could know that, but the voice narrated every detail precisely, every emotion I'd felt back then. How did it know? The flashlight on my phone began to flicker, and I was about to be left in total darkness. I felt panic rising and started banging on the elevator walls, shouting, trying to get someone's attention from outside. But every time I banged, the voice mocked me, laughing as if it found my situation hilarious, as if it were purposely keeping me there, waiting for me to succumb to fear. In a final desperate effort, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight again, trying to illuminate the elevator around me. The light revealed the walls, and for a moment, I felt a false sense of security. But then, I saw a shadow pass behind me in the metallic reflection. It wasn't my shadow. It was something taller, with a humanoid shape that looked distorted, as if it were watching me closely, breathing down my neck. The heat intensified even more, and now I felt a cold, icy breath near my ear, a presence that was closing in, closer with each second. I tried closing my eyes, praying that it was just a nightmare, but the voice grew louder, now whispering directly in my ear, saying, "I'm right here with you, and I'll wait as long as it takes." Time seemed to stretch indefinitely in that elevator. The battery on my phone was almost dead, and with it, my last source of light. The voice continued to torment me, recounting details of my life I could barely recall, as if it had invaded my mind. Every word carried a silent threat, a promise that even if I managed to get out, that presence would stay with me. In the last second before the battery died, I heard a click, and the elevator shifted slightly. The lights flickered back on, and then the elevator began to descend slowly. The feeling of relief was indescribable, but my body was still shaking. When the doors finally opened, I ran out, breathing deeply, as if trying to rid myself of that suffocating presence that still seemed to linger around me. I looked back, expecting to see an empty elevator, but I saw a shadow in the corner, an indistinct shape that seemed to vanish as the doors closed. The feeling that something had truly been in there with me didn't fade. For weeks, every time I entered the elevator, I felt that same weight in the air, that silent, mocking presence. Even now, every time I pass by that elevator, I feel that someone is waiting, a shadow in the dark corner, ready to whisper my secrets and revive my deepest fears. It was a night of blackout in the city, one of those nights when the darkness feels denser, and the nocturnal sounds seem to multiply, echoing through the empty streets. I lived on the third floor of an old building, and my apartment windows looked directly onto a dead-end street. illuminated only by a solitary street lamp, which that night was out. Outside, the silence was nearly absolute, occasionally interrupted by distant footsteps and the whisper of the wind through the trees. But it was when I looked out the window, trying to distract myself from the oppressive feeling of the dark, that I saw something I'll never forget. Down below, in the middle of the deserted street, there was a figure, a tall man, standing rigidly, his appearance indistinct due to the lack of light. He was motionless, facing my building directly, as if staring at my window. My eyes took a while to adjust to the darkness, and I thought maybe it was just a shadow or a trick of the eye. But as time passed, it became clear that he was really there. Unmoving, unblinking, a feeling of discomfort began to consume me. Why would someone be standing in the middle of the street, doing nothing during a blackout? And, even more disturbing, why was he staring directly at my window? There was no other light or movement in the building, and I felt as if I were the only one who had noticed this figure. I closed the curtains, trying to ignore what I had seen, but the sense that that man was still there, watching me, didn't disappear. Time passed, and curiosity overcame fear. I decided to take a quick peek through the crack in the curtains, hoping he had left. But no, he was still there in the same spot, as still as a statue. I couldn't clearly see his face, but something about the way he stood sent an indescribable chill through me. It was as if he were waiting for me. But waiting for what? Something told me that as long as I continued to watch him, he would remain there. Then something changed. In a slow, chilling movement, he took a step toward me, a dragging, calculated step, as if every gesture were intentional. My heart raced, and I stepped back from the window, taking deep breaths to calm myself. For some reason, the thought that he might continue to approach lingered in my mind. Every second seemed to stretch, and I felt the weight of his presence, as if his pace might break the very barrier between outside and inside, reaching the space where I stood. I decided to turn on a small flashlight I had nearby and pointed it at the window, hoping to see more clearly. But as soon as the light crossed the glass and illuminated the street, I saw that he was even closer. It was as if, while I wasn't looking, he had taken several silent steps, closing the distance between us. I turned the light off immediately, panicked, but the damage was done. He knew I was watching. He knew I was aware of his presence. Desperate, I backed away from the window and tried to convince myself that it was all just an illusion. Maybe he was just a strange resident. Maybe he was there for some reason that had nothing to do with me. But every time I moved closer to look, he seemed closer, standing, staring. The distance between us decreased slowly, and every time I turned on the light to check, he seemed to advance a few more steps. After a while, I could no longer resist the urge to look again. I stood up, heart racing, and approached the window. When I looked, he was at the curb directly in front of my building. I could see his face more clearly, but it was a face I wished I had never seen. He looked wrong. His features were almost human, but something was slightly distorted, as if he were a flawed imitation of a person. His eyes were empty, lifeless, fixed on me, and despite the distance between us, I felt as if I could see every detail, as if he were just inches from me. That was when he smiled. It wasn't a regular smile. It was too wide, a smile that didn't correspond to any human emotion. It was a smile of satisfaction, almost as if he were challenging me, telling me that I couldn't do anything to stop his approach. I recoiled, horrified, but the image of that face wouldn't leave my mind. I spent what felt like hours avoiding the window, but deep down, I knew I had to look again. Something inside me compelled me to check, as if he were calling me to witness his presence one last time. When I finally looked, he was standing on the sidewalk, directly below my window. His eyes seemed to pierce through me, and I knew he was waiting for something. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, I closed all the curtains and turned off the flashlight. I sat in complete silence, in the dark, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the rapid beat of my heart. I tried to convince myself that if I ignored his presence, he would leave, that it was all just an illusion created by my fear and the blackout. But then, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk, slow, heavy steps approaching the building's gate. The entrance door creaked, and the sound echoed through the silent building. My heart stopped. He was coming in. I felt terror consume me, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to run. But I was paralyzed, as if that empty gaze still held control over me. The footsteps continued, and each sound was a hammer blow in my chest. The stairs leading to the upper floors were old and creaked with every step, announcing his approach. When he reached my floor, I heard the steps stop in front of my door. The silence that followed was even worse than the footsteps. I held my breath, hoping he would move on, that he would leave, but then I heard a soft knock on the door, a slow, almost gentle knock, but carrying with it an implied threat, as if he were telling me he had all the time in the world. I didn't move. I stayed there, still, until finally, the sound ceased and the footsteps retreated. I waited in silence until I was sure he had gone. But even after all that, I never felt safe again. Even now, every time there's a blackout, I avoid looking at the street. The feeling that he's still there, waiting for the right moment to approach again, has never disappeared.